In the village of Gona, nestled between the emerald hills of Gom State, lived a 14-year-old girl named Amina. Life in Gona moved at the pace of the wind, slow and predictable. The village was the kind where the rooster's crow served as the town crier, and everyone knew the exact number of goats each household owned. Amina was the youngest daughter in a family of 6. Her father, Malam Sani, was a respected elder in the village and worked as a cobbler, while her mother, Haji Alami, sold masa and kunu in the village square. Unlike her older siblings, who dreamed of city life and wealth, Amina had no particular aspirations. Her only expectation from life was to grow old enough to be married to a man who would provide for her basic needs. She found solace in routine, fetching water, pounding millet, and helping her mother in the kitchen. Her world was small but safe, and she saw no reason to disturb its fragile balance. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It was during the Eid el-Kabir festival that change arrived, dressed in the vibrant colors and perfumes of the city. Amina's aunt, Zainab, who had not visited in over 5 years, returned home from Abuja in a gleaming SUV. She wore makeup and heels, spoke in English laced with city slang, and brought with her tales of air-conditioned malls and endless opportunities. The villagers marveled at her transformation, but Amina felt uneasy. Zainab was a whirlwind in their tranquil lives. Zainab immediately took a liking to Amina. "You're too beautiful and smart to be stuck in this village," she often said. "Come with me to Abuja. I will sponsor your education. You can become something big, maybe even a doctor." Amina resisted at first. The city felt like another planet. But under the weight of persuasion from her aunt and her own parents, who believed it would be a great opportunity, Amina reluctantly agreed. With teary eyes and trembling hands, she packed her small bag and boarded the vehicle that would take her away from the only home she had ever known. What she didn't know was that this journey would be the beginning of a long and winding road, one paved with abandonment, courage, and eventually greatness. Abuja was overwhelming. From the moment Amina stepped out of the vehicle, she was swallowed by a sea of blaring horns, hurried footsteps, and foreign smells. Zainab lived in a posh apartment in Was 2, where the floors sparkled and the toilets flushed automatically. The walls were decorated with abstract paintings, and the television seemed larger than Amina's entire room back in Gona. At first, Amina was in awe. She wandered through the apartment like a museum tourist, whispering prayers each time she encountered something new. But the novelty wore off quickly. Zainab enrolled her in a private secondary school, where everything, from the school uniforms to the textbooks, was unfamiliar and demanding. Her classmates teased her for her accent and her inability to grasp basic English grammar. She was lost in a world that refused to slow down for her. The apartment, though luxurious, felt like a prison. She had to follow strict routines, cook unfamiliar meals, and live up to Zainab's high expectations. Zainab, who once promised kindness, turned stern. She scolded Amina for poor grades and often compared her to other city girls. The pressure mounted until Amina could no longer bear it. One rainy morning, without a word, she packed a few clothes and left. She wandered the streets until she found a cluster of northern migrants living in an informal settlement known as Hausa. There, among her own people, she felt a semblance of belonging. But safety is an illusion, and in the shadows of Abuja, predators lurk. Hausa was a chaotic patchwork of zinc roofs, tarpaulin tents, and rusted kiosks. It smelled of suya, burning firewood, and unwashed bodies. But to Amina, it was freedom. Nobody asked her to study or speak English. She could dress in her traditional wrappers, cook tuwo, and sell groundnuts to survive. The men respected her space, and the women, though worn by hardship, were kind. Among the residents was Bala, a young man from Kano who worked as a motor park tout. He was street-smart and charming, with a gap-toothed smile that made Amina laugh. He gave her small gifts, recharge cards, shawarma, and sometimes money. Amina, naive and craving affection, let her guard down. Within months, she discovered she was pregnant. Panic engulfed her. She had no idea how to tell anyone. She wrapped her belly with cloth, wore oversized hijabs, and avoided eye contact. But as the months passed, her secret grew too large to hide. In her 7th month, She collapsed in the market. Concerned bystanders rushed her to Garki General Hospital. There, under the glaring lights and sterile sheets, Amina gave birth to a baby girl. The doctors were amazed that both mother and child survived, given the complications. The baby, though premature, let out a strong, defiant cry. Amina named her Fatimah, but when the hospital bill came, reality struck with brutal force. Amina, barely able to read, could only weep at the number. She had no relatives in the city, no friends who could help, and no one to turn to. One quiet afternoon, she slipped out of the hospital and vanished, leaving behind her child. The nurses found Fatimah alone in her cot, swaddled in a threadbare cloth with no mother in sight. Security was alerted. Posters were printed and shared. Calls were made to the Ministry of Women Affairs. But Amina was never found. Fatimah became a mystery and a miracle. The hospital staff couldn't bear to send her to an orphanage immediately. Nurses took turns feeding her. Doctors checked her vitals during their rounds. Even patients brought baby clothes and food. They called her the hospital's baby. Months turned into a year. The hospital management finally decided to transfer her to a government-approved motherless babies' home in Guarimpa. However, the hospital continued to sponsor her welfare and education. Every Eid and Christmas, staff from the hospital came visiting with gifts. Some nurses, especially matron Bucky and sister Aisha, formed a bond with the child so deep it transcended duty. Fatimah grew up healthy, curious, and bright. Her room in the orphanage was filled with storybooks, dolls, and photographs with nurses who came to visit. But the question of her origin lingered like an unanswered prayer. At T16, Fatimah began to notice patterns. Unlike the other children, she received regular visitors who wore white coats and carried stethoscopes. Her fees were paid with hospital checks. One day, she confronted matron Bucky. "Why do people call me the hospital baby?" Matron Bucky hesitated. Then she took Fatimah by the hand and led her to a quiet room. There, with trembling lips and teary eyes, she told her everything. From her mother's escape to her miraculous birth, Fatimah sat in silence. The world spun. Questions choked her. Did my mother ever try to come back? We never heard from her again. Matron Bucky replied. But we never stopped loving you. Fatimah didn't cry. She simply nodded. That night, she looked in the mirror and whispered to herself, I am not unwanted. I am chosen. The revelation didn't break her. It ignited her, fueled by a desire to honor those who saved her. Fatimah became an exceptional student. She aced every exam, devoured medical textbooks, and spent her holidays volunteering at the hospital. When she gained admission to the University of Abuja to study medicine and surgery, it felt like destiny. She graduated top of her class and returned to Garki General for her housemanship. Staff who once fed her with spoons now shook her hand with pride. Fatimah was later offered a position as a full-time doctor. She specialized in pediatric surgery. Inspired by her own birth story, her surgeries were precise, her bedside manner impeccable. Patients began to request her by name. She was no longer the hospital baby. She was now Dr. Fatimah. Fatimah's name began to echo through the corridors of Garki General and beyond. Her work in pediatric surgery became the stuff of legends. Word spread like wildfire. Here was a young woman who revived neonates that others had already wrapped in white cloth, pronounced stillborn, and mourned. She performed delicate procedures on underdeveloped organs with such grace and confidence that even seasoned consultants watched her with awe. Mothers wept in gratitude. Fathers knelt in hospital chapels, calling down blessings upon her. The hospital baby who became a healer made headlines in newspapers and on evening news reports. Her childhood story, once whispered in pity, had now become a symbol of divine redemption. Young medical students idolized her, and consultants consulted her. But with admiration came immense pressure. Then came the case that would change everything. It was just past midnight when a convoy of police and security vehicles blazed into the emergency ward. Armed men jumped out, forming a protective barrier around a stretcher bearing a small, limp body. The child was bleeding heavily. Nurses gasped when they heard the identity. Miriam, the only daughter of a powerful senator, had been involved in a ghastly car crash. No doctor stepped forward. The risk was too high. Failure would be a national disgrace. But Fatimah didn't hesitate. Prep the ore, she said calmly. slipping on her gloves. The surgery lasted 8 grueling hours. At times, the girl flatlined. At others, her tiny body seemed to fight back. When Fatima finally stepped out of the operating theater, her scrubs soaked with blood and sweat, the senator and his wife rushed forward. "She's stable," Fatima whispered. The mother collapsed into tears. That one operation earned her a National Humanitarian Award. But what truly moved her was the nickname patients and staff now called her, Saint Fatima the Healer. Fatima's hands could mend the tiniest hearts, but hers remained quietly fractured. She had poured everything into her profession, her nights, her youth, her silence. But there was a hollow space she could never quite reach, the question of her origins. She had no idea who her biological father was. Her mother, Amina, remained a ghost in her memories, more of a wound than a person. She'd glance at every new patient's face, wondering if someday the woman who left her in a hospital bassinet would return. But life had its own timing. Umar entered quietly, a young radiologist with thoughtful eyes and an even gentler voice. He never forced conversation, only offered calm presence. He admired her from afar, offering coffee during long nights and reading her silence like scripture. Over time, their bond deepened, not through grand declarations, but through quiet companionship. Their marriage was intimate and beautiful. An early morning nikah under baobab trees, attended by nurses, doctors, and the few orphans she still visited. Together, they built a home rich with laughter. They had 3 children, Khadija, Musa, and Amina, each name chosen with purpose, each child a small echo of the family she once longed for. Yet peace is fragile. In the weeks that followed, Fatima immersed herself even deeper into her work at Al-Nur Memorial Hospital, a place that had evolved into far more than just a place of employment. For her, it was a sanctuary, a sacred intersection between pain and healing. Her days were saturated with purpose, yet beneath the surface, a subtle unrest began to stir. Earlier that week, she had awakened from a dream so vivid, it lingered on her skin like the weight of early morning dew. In the dream, she stood frozen in the emergency room as a frail, sunken-eyed woman was wheeled in, her chart bearing a name that thundered in Fatima's chest: Amina Ibrahim. The dream rattled her. It wasn't merely the intensity, it was the unsettling familiarity. The woman's eyes, her voice, the weight of her presence all felt too real, as if some hidden part of her soul was reaching for a long-buried memory. Still, she dismissed it. Dreams were just dreams, weren't they? And yet, something told her otherwise. That same afternoon, as she reviewed donor records for the upcoming 5th anniversary of the Healing Hands Foundation, her eyes paused on a name that refused to blend in: Mrs. Abdul Amina. A chill traced the arc of her spine. It was more than déjà vu, it was recognition. Something long buried had begun to stir, as though a premonition had crossed the threshold of her conscious life. She didn't understand it yet, but she knew she had to find. Al-Nur Memorial was not simply a hospital. It was a cathedral of resilience. Within its whitewashed walls, pain met precision, and hope trickled through intravenous tubes and prayers whispered in corridors. At the center of it all, Dr. Fatima Yusuf moved with grace and intention. Her turquoise scrubs and ever-present stethoscope became symbols of comfort in a world so often ruled by fear. For 5 years, she had devoted herself to this vocation, not just as a physician, but as a mender of broken systems, a healer of forgotten communities. Out of the memory of her own abandonment, her silent wounds, and the ache of her past, Fatima had built the Healing Hands Foundation. What began as a sketch of idealism had grown into a force of impact. Through this foundation, villages received malaria nets, mothers attended free prenatal camps, children received education, and women were empowered to reclaim their dignity. And at the core of it all burned Fatima's relentless compassion, a fire that refused to be extinguished. So when her eyes again landed on the name Mrs. Abdul Amina, she knew it could not be ignored. She couldn't explain why it struck her so deeply. It wasn't just familiarity. It felt like looking into a shadow and recognizing it as her own. She had never dared to ask why until that moment. Now, she needed to know. As the 5th anniversary of the foundation approached, Fatima took care to personally invite each major donor. When she reached the name of Mrs. Abdul Amina, her fingers trembled slightly as she sealed the envelope. Her heart fluttered with unspoken questions and a fragile, quiet hope. She prayed the woman would come. The Healing Hands anniversary was not merely a celebration. It felt like a reckoning. The Abuja International Conference Center was transformed into a sanctuary of gratitude. Beneath soft chandeliers and flowing silks, guests from all walks of life gathered, not in search of glamour, but in service of purpose. They came to honor 5 years of compassion, of wounds bandaged, of lives saved. Backstage, Fatima stood still, her breath even and deliberate. Dressed in an elegant blue kaftan adorned with silver embroidery, she appeared poised, yet 1,000 unspoken emotions surged within her. As she parted the velvet curtain and scanned the crowd, her gaze caught on a woman sitting alone at the back, wrapped in emerald green, poised and composed. Her posture, the slope of her shoulders, the tension in her fingers, something about her being struck a chord deep inside Fatima's soul. She knew. The woman was Mrs. Abdul Amina. The name had haunted her since she first read it, and now it had a face. But beyond recognition, something deeper stirred, an ache of familiarity that defied logic. As the evening progressed, with its speeches, tears, and triumphs, Fatima's gaze kept returning to the woman in emerald. She herself spoke eloquently of the Foundation's journey, yet her soul remained tethered to one unsolved question. When the event drew to a close and guests began to disperse, Fatima moved through the thinning crowd. Her steps felt both weightless and heavy. She approached the woman and asked softly, "Mrs. Abdul Amina?" The woman rose, older than any image Fatima might have imagined, yet her eyes, those eyes, carried a sorrow and a truth too familiar to ignore. She nodded and acknowledged Fatima by name. Then the truth came. Amina, with a trembling voice, admitted that she had not come expecting anything. She only wanted to see the woman Fatima had become. Her name had felt familiar to Fatima for a reason. Amina was not just a donor. She was the woman who had given her life. She was her mother. The words shattered the walls of time. The world seemed to pause as Fatima struggled to breathe. 32 years ago, Amina had abandoned her newborn daughter at Garki General Hospital, driven by homelessness, shame, and fear. Disowned by her family and abandoned by the child's father, Amina believed leaving her child behind would offer her a better chance at life. But she never returned. The shame had screamed louder than her courage for decades. Fatima listened, numb and raw. Every lonely birthday, every silent prayer to an invisible parent came flooding back. Yet what struck her wasn't anger. It was sorrow, tangled with disbelief. She had spent a lifetime trying to fix something she couldn't name, trying to fill a hollow she never understood. Now, at last, she had an answer. Amina confessed that she had watched from afar, moved by Fatima's strength, her voice, her work. For years, she had donated anonymously, too ashamed to reveal herself, until she saw Fatima on television and knew she had to step out of hiding. She hadn't come seeking forgiveness. She only wanted to tell the truth. Fatima couldn't yet find forgiveness, nor could she summon rage. What she found instead was clarity, an opening in the dark. She invited her mother to sit. They spoke. Not easily, not cleanly, but honestly. That was the beginning. A week later, Fatima invited Amina to her office at Healing Hands. The dialogue continued, carefully, like old wounds learning to breathe. Over warm tea and silences that stretched, but did not fracture, they explored their shared history. Eventually, Fatima introduced Amina to her children. Her youngest asked, "Are you really my grandma?" And Amina broke into tears, nodding as she held her grandchild for the first time. The media caught wind of their reunion, but Fatima declined every interview. "This is not a headline," she said. "This is healing." Together, mother and daughter launched a new branch of the foundation, Mothers Without Borders, a program designed to support young mothers in crisis, so that no woman would be forced into the choice Amina once made. Their pain became purpose. Their sorrow became a lifeline for others. A year later, Fatima stood beside her mother at a Healing Hands event in Gona. They spoke not as doctor and guest, not even as just mother and daughter, but as women who had found redemption through truth. Fatima told the gathered crowd, "We are not defined by where we were abandoned. We are defined by where we choose to begin again. Amina added, I made a mistake that I thought would haunt me forever, but my daughter turned my shame into strength. She gave me back something I thought I had lost, family. The applause was thunderous, but what mattered more was the quiet afterward, the shared glance between a mother and daughter who had wandered far, and finally, come home. Love had won. And this time, it will stay.